At Microsoft, they see what's happening here as a platform shift that is roughly equivalent to the shift from PCs to mobile devices.
Oh, interesting.
And they know that they missed that one, and they don't want to miss this one, because if they're right, if there is a platform shift happening and AI is the future of everything, they want to be one of the top two players, because we know from the history of the technology industry over the last 30 years that there's only room for two players in any big technology niche.
Hey, Ed, it's great to see you.
It has been a minute, hasn't it, Todd?
It sure has. I really appreciate you jumping on. Let me introduce you now. Ed Bott is an award-winning technology journalist and an author who's been covering Microsoft and the PC industry for more than 3 decades. He's the author of more than 25 books, including, particularly relevant to our conversation today, Windows 11 Inside Out. You know, Ed, when I read your coverage, I feel like I'm at a coffee shop in a town that I'm really familiar with somebody who knows it, infinitely better than I do, and isn't afraid to speak the truth, no matter what the mayor might think.
I'm flattered by that. I mean, I think one of the things about having such a long relationship with Microsoft, like I do, it's like it goes back even more than 30 years, is that how does that insurance commercial go? I know things because I've seen things. Yeah. And so, yeah, I've seen Microsoft do a lot of things. I know their playbook, and, so you see it and you go, okay, oh, they're doing this again. But then a lot of it too is they go down blind alleys and then they reverse course and come back. And a lot of things that they do, probably the single most important thing to know about Microsoft is that they do something and fail at it. They don't just bury it. They'll deal with it for a while, and then they'll come back and they'll try to do it again in a different way. And they'll try to do it again in a different way. So, for example, they came out with the original Surface RT, which was an ARM-based computer running a version of Windows that had been compiled for the ARM CPU. And it was one of the most spectacular failures in Microsoft's history. And yet they came back 7 years later with another ARM-based PC and slowly built it up. And now I think the last numbers that I showed were close to 70% of the consumer market is now buying ARM-based PCs, even though the business community hasn't gotten there yet.
This observation you're making is very relevant because it's something that we saw this week. And for people who didn't catch the news, and one of the main reasons I wanted to speak with you is there was some big news for Windows this week as it related to AI. Microsoft is updating Windows 11 with new AI features. It's basically giving the operating system a voice and trying to move beyond the keyboard and the mouse into natural language interactions. I'm a little skeptical about this, Ed, so I want to get your take on this. But in addition to that, they announced new agentic capabilities, Copilot Actions. Now, previously, these were available in the browser, which I was not a huge fan of. That whole idea of going out and booking tickets for you, I'm not there yet. But what they announced this week in an experimental form is that this new feature will be able to perform tasks directly on your PC. And I'm on board with this. But overall, Ed, I'd love to get your take on what the announcements this week represent for Windows in the arc of the history of the operating system that you've covered for so many years.
So, Todd, you were probably at the same Microsoft event that I was. And I'm thinking it was 10, 12, maybe 13 years ago, where they had built this sort of room of the future, and you could walk into it and they had videos going on, and their vision was that, you woke up in the morning and you talked to your computer, and your computer told you what your day was going to be like, and it gave you a little summary of the news, and then you'd say, and then this was a vision, and it was, I think it was around 2011 or 2012, and it was just about when Cortana was coming out.
Yes.
And again, an example of something that Microsoft introduced. It failed, and so they removed it from Windows. But I don't think it's an accident that Copilot is a 3-syllable word that begins with C, because it's that same vision that they had of, they wanted you to be able to talk to your computer, talk to your phone, running one of these devices, and have it act on your whole day. The question becomes, has the technology base, have the stacks of technology that are available to us as consumers and business people, and to the developer community, have they finally caught up to make this vision possible? And I think the technology is there. Whether they can pull it off and make this sort of seamless and helpful, and have an assistant who doesn't hallucinate you into a meeting, right, that with people that you haven't heard of, that's going to be the open question.
I heard Stevie Batich talk about this. He's in the applied sciences group of Microsoft, and he's somebody that I've found, if you listen to him, you get a sense for what Microsoft is going to be revealing in 6 months to a year to 2 years. And He was talking about this whole notion of moving beyond the keyboard and the mouse, the point and the click, to the voice. And from the very beginning, I was skeptical. And I recognize that this paradigm is there. Alexa, even texting. I feel like, I'm one of my parents. Sometimes when I text, I talk into the phone to do that, because I've found that that's easier. But something about sitting in a chair at my desk, talking to my computer, doesn't grab me yet. I struggle with that notion. What's your take on just that mode of interaction with a computer? And do you think this will become as popular as Microsoft seems to think it will?
I have the same personal reaction to it that you do. I find the disembodied voice coming from the computer, acting like it's my good friend, to be a little, not quite creepy, but verging towards creepy.
Yeah.
I struggle with that. I do think, though, from a generational thing, it might be that younger people are going to be more comfortable with that than we are. And so that's an important thing that I always have to check myself on. Am I just being a grumpy old man here? And, somebody who grew up thinking that a keyboard and a mouse was the only way to interact with devices. I think we've also been disappointed, disillusioned with voice assistants, because, Alexa and Google are both so maddeningly, and Siri, they're also maddeningly literal. And, if you don't say it exactly right, you get a weird answer, and they have only a limited number of things that they can really do well. And so, I think it's possible and even likely that that Google and Microsoft and Meta and Anthropic are there's all of a sudden going to be this flurry of great improvements in the way that this technology works and how effective it is. But I'm going to wait to see it before I believe it.
And the way that they're rolling this out is also interesting. Hey, Copilot. This has become clearly a new catchphrase that they want to catch on with Windows users. And it'll essentially be a wake word, much like Alexa or Hey Google, or, Hey Siri. Is it Hey Siri? I'm not an Apple user, so I have to acknowledge I have my ignorance on iOS these days. But this notion of basically saying to your computer, hey, I want you to start talking with me. And like in an office environment, I struggle to see that. And maybe it's something that people will do at home. Maybe it's more for consumers. I'm just struggling even with the generational acknowledgement that you made, and I admit that as well. I'm just struggling to see it actually happen.
It's bad enough when the person in the next cubicle is on the phone all the time and you have to listen to their conversations. But at least, there's usually breaks in the action, where they're not on a call and, and they're typing up their notes, or they're looking at, they're looking up something in their search engine, or they're playing solitaire or whatever they're doing, but you get little bouts of silence. And what the vision that Microsoft is talking about here has us basically, talking nonstop and having these conversations. So I'm skeptical about that. Now, one of the things, of course, that in the discussions that we had with Microsoft this week, they made clear that this is an optional form of input. You can do it the old-fashioned way, or you can do it this way. And so I suspect that there's going to be a continuum for people, right? Some people are going to be really comfortable. They're lousy typists, but they're very fluid at talking, especially people who are like in sales and marketing type jobs. They could be very attracted to this, and it could indeed make them more productive with features like this. But I know, there's other people who are just going to say, no, I'm going to keep typing, but maybe there'll be certain things there where it'll be easier and quicker to just say, hey, Copilot, do this thing for me.
That's a really important point. I actually noticed that, and it was different from what I heard Stevie say, at least in my recollection, 6 months ago when I was at a presentation that he gave. The notion is that it's additive. It is an extension. It is an and, not an or, when you talk about voice versus keyboard and mouse. And Microsoft was very clear about that. And I wonder if that was in part a recognition of exactly what you and I are saying, that some people are just not going to be ready to talk to their PCs.
Yeah. I can think about, for example, by the way, when I just said, hey, who, it popped up on my screen over here. I don't know if you heard.
No.
Because I had turned that feature on, and so I had to go quickly, say, sorry, just kidding. But so I could see, for example, I'm in the middle of writing a piece, right? And I want to know, okay, what was the exact date that that Windows 11 launched on? Now I could go to my browser, go to a search page, type in the request that I want, and have it pop up, and the answer would probably be in the summary at the top, and then go back to my document. It would probably be faster for me to get that very specific, very easy to look up answer by just saying, hey, who, that what was the launch date for Windows 11? And I would probably get it, and I could just type it in there and go on. So that's a scenario. There are scenarios where, I can see things happening. But there's also scenarios where I could see if the question isn't an easily verifiable thing, if there's anything controversial about it, that I'm likely to get something that is either completely wrong or wrong in the kind of subtle way that lawyers are getting in trouble for these days, for like introducing, citations into their arguments and pleadings and briefs that turn out to be either completely non-existent, or the quote doesn't exist even though the case does, or the case says the exact opposite of what the quote they're trying to use is. And you're seeing lots and lots and lots of that stuff. And that to me is the Achilles heel of all these things. For quick and simple answers, great. For anything more complicated than that, it's like, I don't know, man.
Yeah. Your mileage may vary. Good luck.
Yeah. and in fact, it says, I forget what the exact...
may make mistakes.
Down there in the little tiny... I got the Copilot window sitting up here. It says, Copilot may make mistakes.
All right. So that is the new Hey Copilot feature and Microsoft's broader push to get people to use their voice to interact with their PCs. But Ed, there was another interesting feature, and that was Copilot Actions. And I know you did a deep dive on this, including some of the security issues. So let's talk about that when we come back. You're listening to GeekWire, and we will be right back. Welcome back. It's Todd Bishop. I'm talking this week with Ed Bott. He is a longtime technology journalist. He's been covering Microsoft in the PC industry for more than 3 decades. He's a senior contributing editor for ZDNet, where you can find his coverage from this past week of Microsoft's rollout. Rollout isn't quite the right word. Microsoft's introduction and teaser of a new feature in Windows called Copilot Actions. And actually, it's not even a new feature. It's an expansion of a new feature. Ed, save me here. Tell me what's going on.
I think the reason that you're struggling with that is because Microsoft is struggling with this a little bit also. So Microsoft is going out of their way to make it clear that this is not a new feature that everyone is going to see in Windows 11, not now and probably not in the near future. This is an experimental preview coming to insiders for testing, and they want to respond to the feedback that they get from testing before they release it to the public.
So Copilot Actions was previously introduced as a browser feature, and the notion is pretty common, at least for people who are deep into this whole idea of AI agents in that context, where it'll go out and, book a ticket or a flight, or, that's the idea, that it'll be more of an online service. But as I said earlier, this is more interesting to me in that it will do things on your PC. And I can think of all sorts of things that I would want to do weekly, where I just have these files I need to combine on every Friday morning and, publish to a website. I need to compress a PDF over and over and over again, based on different tasks that I have. And this notion of the AI being able to take action on your computer to scroll and click and point and view things is very interesting to me. But as you wrote this week, there are also lots of security issues. And it seems like Microsoft is learning some lessons here from the prior rollout or attempted rollout of Recall, the feature that can basically see and record everything on your PC. What's your sense of how they're approaching this rollout of Copilot Actions as it relates to security and privacy?
Right. The comparison to Recall was really clear to me in the way that they're doing this. Because when they first announced the Recall feature last year, I think it was last April 2024, they were really excited about it. They thought, this is this great thing. All of our customers are going to love it. And they were absolutely unprepared for security professionals and ordinary people saying, this sounds weird. This sounds, like it's going to invade my privacy. I don't want something. It looks like a keylogger. And they were completely unprepared for that reaction. And they wound up having to do a whole bunch of backtracking and add a whole bunch of privacy features to it and security features that turned out to be a really good thing. They skipped all of that painful part with this announcement this week, making it very clear that they want security professionals to look at this feature. They want ordinary users to try it out and find the places, not just where there's security issues, but where it can help them be productive and also, just help them eliminate routine work there. But as they pointed out in a blog post, because these agents are able to act as if they're a user of your computer, if somebody can build an agent that has malicious capabilities in it or has cross-site scripting capabilities, for example, they could build a completely innocuous looking agent that seems perfectly useful, perfectly helpful, perfectly innocent, but it could, in the background, be in there exfiltrating data from your computer, stealing your passwords, stealing Excel spreadsheets filled with confidential data. So they've added some. The agent works in its own agent workspace, which is a sandboxed area where it only has access to things that you give it access to. The agent itself is a user account that is restricted, so that again, it can't access as an administrator on your PC, and it can't perform the kind of malicious actions that you might get with a piece of malware that you download from the internet. So they're kind of thinking about this, but as we know, the way that security works is it's a cat and mouse game. They introduce something, the bad guys rub their hands together and figure out ways to exploit it. And so the question is the architecture that they've got for this at a good enough starting point for it to be secure by design, or are they going to need to shore up the architecture?
It's really interesting because Microsoft has said publicly, hey, security is the number one priority, top issue. And I always kind of chuckle at that because even in the briefing that you and I got to hear with Yusuf Mehdi and others, security was last. and yeah. to your point, they've certainly learned the lesson, but I always have a hard time swallowing the notion that Microsoft is thinking about security before new features. It doesn't seem plausible based on the evidence of the ordering of things that they talk about.
Yeah, I think actually they're thinking about revenue first and foremost.
Yeah,
as one of a handful of multi-trillion-dollar publicly held companies in the world. I guess that's the CEO's job, and everyone who reports to him is to think about revenue. But all of these features are going in there with the idea of increasing engagement in these AI features, which are not coincidentally going to cost more as you start to use them, and if you become addicted to them or reliant on them, the more you use them, the more likely they will be able to upsell you to the next package.
But as you said, Microsoft is very clear. Copilot Actions is an experimental feature. It's rolling out with limited capabilities. It's disabled by default, even in those situations, and it runs in a contained workspace. And this was interesting to me. To your point, it's in a dedicated user account with limited folder access. So it's like Copilot is kind of a new user on your computer in some ways, that you're able to control their permissions and the things that they can access. And it's, on the enterprise side, Microsoft has also done something similar with the Entra IDs, this whole notion of having corporate accounts for agents. So that was an interesting parallel to me as well. So I'm actually looking forward to using this and to trying it, in part because a lot of the AI startups that are out there that are doing similar things are Mac first, at least in my experience. There's a few that I've wanted to try. So it's nice to see this kind of thing coming to Windows, setting aside the security issues.
Yeah, and there is an existing precedent for the kind of account that they're setting up here. There's a feature in Windows that a lot of people don't even know about called Windows Sandbox. What it is a virtual machine that you run. You have to be running the Pro or Enterprise version of Windows 11, but you click the Sandbox thing after you enable the feature, and it spins up a copy of Windows 11 running in its own completely sandboxed environment, with most of the applications that come with Windows are not included with it. It has a browser and a command line and file explorer. And so the whole idea, and it's running under its own dedicated account, WDAG, I think it's called, Windows Desktop Application Guard. So if you get a file or an executable and you say, well, I want to try this out, but I do not want to run this on my main PC just in case there's something weird or hinky about it, you spin up a copy of Windows Sandbox and you run the file in there and you watch what it does. And when you close Windows Sandbox, all trace of whatever you did vanishes. And so this is architected in a way that's very similar to that. although it expands the sandbox slightly so that it can interact with you and your apps in a way that you have control over. But it's a logical extension of the Windows Sandbox capability.
Very interesting. Anything else that you would point out on the Copilot Actions that stood out to you, Ed, and when you think about the arc of Windows history in particular, and what this means for, what the capabilities of Windows will be going into the next decade?
Well, the one thing that I can think about from the history of Microsoft demos is that the things that they demo are usually chosen because they make sexy demos. The things that people wind up doing with those features turn out to be completely different. That's sort of the history of the PC that way, that people find novel uses for things that the designers never intended for them to do. Spreadsheets, for example, started out as just, a way to add numbers together, but people soon realized, hey, I can do just about anything with a spreadsheet. And so I think we're going to find some very interesting applications of these Windows agents, and I expect to be very surprised by the uses that people come up with.
All right, so that is Copilot Actions. There's one last thing I want to talk to you about, Ed, and that has to do with the computer that I'm using right now to connect with you, which I bought a few months ago. So let's talk about that. When we come back, we'll talk about Copilot Plus PCs and what all of this means for them. We'll be right back. You're listening to GeekWire. Welcome back. It's Todd Bishop. It's a pleasure this week to be talking with Ed Bott. As I mentioned at the beginning to him, I was writing my story about the Windows announcements this week, wishing I could talk to him in advance of them just to get his take. So it's really nice to be able to sit down and get his thoughts on what Microsoft announced. And Ed, one of the takeaways that I had was Microsoft last year introduced this whole concept of Copilot Plus PCs, these sort of supercharged machines with neural processing units in addition to the CPU and the GPU. And I ended up getting one of those. It's an Intel-based machine. I didn't want to get one of the ARM-based machines. I actually got one. I got a Surface Copilot Plus PC, and I started trying to use Adobe, Acrobat, even just like basic Adobe stuff, and it was just acting weird. And I ended up sending it back, waiting for a Intel-based machine in the ThinkPad line, which I love. I've still, even under Lenovo, just love these machines, the keyboard and the whole thing. Anyway, did I make a mistake? Because what I took away from this week's announcements was the AI features are not going to be exclusive to Copilot Plus PCs. If anything, everybody's going to be getting these things. And maybe I bought the wrong machine. Maybe I spent too much for too much hardware. And where do you see all this shaking out? And will Copilot Plus PCs still be a thing in another year or so?
There's a fair amount to unpack there.
I'm sorry, Ed. That was a lot.
That's
I got
okay.
a lot of feelings about
okay,
this.
Because I think that the market is just as confused about it as you are. The Copilot Plus PC, basically the defining factor for one of those is that it has an NPU, a neural processing unit. And so the stuff that they've announced this week, sort of the basic bread and butter AI stuff, has to be able to run on any fairly modern, fast enough Windows PC. If they were to restrict those features to only systems that had a dedicated neural processing unit, they would be waiting 5 years before the installed base was large enough to make a difference. And then there would still be 50% of the base that would be running on machines that didn't have a dedicated NPU. So the NPU is going to pay off for you in the reasonably near term by doing things faster, doing some of these actions faster, and by also enabling some kind of privacy features the same way that Apple is doing, by moving some of the AI processing capabilities directly onto the device and performing it directly in an NPU. They can do it quickly and privately. So there isn't a round trip to a server somewhere, a whole lot of cycles being done on the server, and then a result being sent back to you. It's done very quickly on your device. But it's sort of it's a catch-22 for Microsoft, because they need to get these PCs out there and they need to shift the installed base to one that has NPU capabilities before the privacy enhancing on-device features that they're building into future versions of Windows, before those will be relevant to a lot of people.
They need a critical mass to make it worthwhile for developers to build to those features.
Right. And the average PC these days lasts well over 6 years. So they just have to keep rolling these things out and hoping that the advanced features that you have will be appealing enough to people that they'll buy the new advanced systems that are capable of processing them in a way that's, has the performance that they need. But that's, at Microsoft, they see what's happening here as a platform shift that is roughly equivalent to the shift from PCs to mobile devices.
Oh, interesting.
And they know that they missed that one, and they don't want to miss this one, because if they're right, if there is a platform shift happening and AI is the future of everything, they want to be one of the top two players, because we know from the history of the technology industry over the last 30 years that there's only room for two players in any big technology niche.
And it's interesting if you think about it from the perspective of Microsoft writ large. They've got Azure, and clearly they're one of the leaders there in AI, thanks to OpenAI in part, but also thanks to what Microsoft has done over the years. They've got Office, speaking roughly about Microsoft 365. I still think of it as Office. Sorry. Yeah. They've got that. And when you see what they're doing with Microsoft 365 Copilot, they're making some progress there. And you could argue whether that's among the leaders in the industry or not. And then here you've got Windows, which is kind of this legacy product. And my question there is is this Microsoft feeling like they have to do AI in Windows, and so therefore they're doing it and they're kind of forcing it? Or do you feel like they're actually seeing the future here and anticipating the trends and doing it in a way that makes sense organically?
If you look at a couple of the things that Microsoft has published on its corporate website in the last year or so, there's an observation that Satya Nadella has made a couple times about his experience with a Digital Equipment Corporation way back when, with DEC.
Yeah.
And DEC used to be one of the most important companies in computing. They basically, the DEC, I think they were mini computers, but they dominated the industry. And within a matter of a few years, the company became irrelevant because the shift to desktop PCs just completely overtook the whole model of terminals talking to mainframes and mini computers. And so he specifically has called out the painful experience of watching Dave Cutler, who came over to Microsoft from DEC and built Windows NT. He said, we don't want someone else to be the Microsoft to us, and we turn out to be the DEC. And that is, and so the vision that he is articulating, and presumably all of the executives that he has beneath him after several reorganizations are on board with this idea that the entire technology space is doing a massive platform shift. Everything will be AI, and you're either a winner, a player in that space, or you're a loser, and you're going to be like DEC, or you're going to be like IBM, where your legacy businesses can maintain your revenue for a while, but you're just going to, slowly decline into irrelevance.
As you look at these announcements about Windows this past week, do you have a sense for which of those trajectories they're on?
Well, I'm still in the AI skeptic camp. The AI chatbots and the AI agents are capable of doing some interesting things. The question becomes, are they additive to the productivity that we get just from conventional computing technology, or are they truly going to replace all of that stuff? And then the second question becomes, even if there is a major platform shift happening here, is Microsoft going to be one of the companies that winds up one of those top 2 or 3 companies that is up there? And that's a big open question, and I understand why the top executive ranks at Microsoft feel paranoid and in the best possible way, but also threatened. They say, this is an existential threat for us, and that's how they're responding to it. And the thing for me that it comes down to is I hear from a lot of people who say, please stop putting AI in everything. I don't need it. I don't want it. I don't want it in my face. And yet, I think the business imperative for Microsoft is we need to put it in everyone's face because we need to get everyone using it. And so that, the question becomes, will people keep resisting, or will they say, oh, okay, I get it now. Oh, it's good enough now. Oh, I like it. Oh, this is great. I want more. They need to get to that stage. And I have yet to see any evidence that shift where people say, I love AI, I want more of it, is there yet.
I think it comes down to the old killer app question. You mentioned spreadsheets and Excel earlier, and I think you're right. I don't know if, especially in the context of the PC, we've yet seen the thing that makes people say, that, I cannot live without that. I will buy a computer that costs twice as much with an operating system that, basically does those things. And for me, I think the glimmer of hope is in Copilot Actions, and that's just me personally.
And it isn't just individuals making that decision.
Right.
From Microsoft's core business comes from large corporations, large business, medium to large size businesses, and then their managed service providers all being able to write huge contracts with big numbers of PCs, big numbers of Microsoft 365 subscriptions, and big numbers of Copilot add-ons in order to get the revenue that's going to justify the huge investments that they're making in this stuff.
Ed, before I let you go, I can't believe I haven't said the phrase Windows 10 this whole time, because this was a milestone week. This was the moment where Microsoft stopped support for Windows 10. It was 10 years old. What are your thoughts on that moment? Can you reflect on that? I mean, you also wrote Windows 10 Inside Out too,
not only that, 4 different editions, four different editions of Windows 10. So the good news is, Windows 10 gets an extra year of life for people who want to sign up for the free updates. All you need is like 1,000 Microsoft rewards points in your Microsoft account, and you can get a year's worth of updates for free. And there's also ways. One of the most popular articles I've had in the entire nearly 20 years that I've been at ZDNet is my article on how to upgrade your incompatible Windows 10 PC to Windows 11, even though Microsoft says you can't. And I'm getting multiple emails a day from people saying, thank you, I didn't have to recycle my PC. I still like my Windows, this PC, and I was going to go out and buy a new one, but thanks to your instructions, I was able to upgrade it to Windows 11.
Nice. Okay, I will link to that. I will actually read that too, because I'm sitting here looking at my parents' Windows 10 PC on the desktop. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. So this is great. I really appreciate it, Ed. I will link to all of your coverage in addition to Microsoft's announcements this past week. Thank you so much for taking the time. It's wonderful to be able to talk with you about this stuff.
It's been fun. Thank you, Todd.
Ed Bott is a senior contributing editor for ZDNet, and he's written more than 25 books over the years, including Windows 11 Inside Out and 4 editions of Windows 10 Inside Out. Thanks for listening, everybody. And thanks to Buzz Bruggeman for suggesting that I speak with Ed for this episode. Buzz is the co-founder of ActiveWords, which is a Windows utility that I use daily, multiple times a day, and pay for. You can check it out at activewords.com. I'm GeekWire co-founder Todd Bishop. We'll be back next week with a new episode of the GeekWire Podcast.